1939. Toni Jo and her husband Cowboy had a special kind of love, like Bonnie and Clyde or Romeo and Juliet. They would go to great lengths to love each other and to be together. But star-crossed lovers usually end in tragedy, and this story is no different. After her husband is convicted of murder, Toni Jo hatches a plan to spring him from prison. Along the way, she will murder an innocent man, and instead of saving her husband, becomes the first and only woman in Louisiana to die in the electric chair. This is a story of murder and love. This is the story of Claude Cowboy Henry and his wife, Toni Jo, Louisiana's Tiger Girl. Hey y'all, I'm Kris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potterworth. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Well, welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our Corsican friends,
Okay.
benvenuti.
Very nicely done.
That's an island in the Mediterranean Sea south of France.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And you know why I know?
Why?
Because my one guilty pleasure, I'm telling on myself,
Okay.
my one guilty pleasure in reality TV
Yeah.
is something on Bravo called Below Deck.
Oh, yeah.
And when they do Below Deck Med, they have been to the island,
Yeah, Corsica.
to Corsica.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you know my dirty little secret.
Benvenuti.
I don't watch any of the Housewives. I don't watch any of that other stuff. I only watch Below Deck, but I watch all of the Below Decks. The sailing. I even went over to Peacock and watched the one that was Down Under.
Yeah.
I love it. I love all the yachties. The stories are pretty funny.
Yeah.
And someday I just picture myself on one of those yachts, but I'd probably be seasick. But
We'll get you that little dot behind you.
but anyway, yeah. Well, wherever you are listening from a yacht in the Mediterranean
Yeah,
or at home, be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe.
please.
You can watch us on YouTube.
Yep.
And you can also join our closed Facebook group, The In-Laws and Outlaws.
Come on down.
We want to welcome everybody who's joined recently. Thank you for being a part of our crazy little family.
Yep.
We even get in there sometimes when there are verdicts getting ready to be read and everybody's just chiming in,
Yep.
giving each other links all around the world where people can watch it. It's a good group of people.
Yes, it is.
If you're a true crime aficionado, go check it out.
Please do.
Okay. I had the best time researching this case.
All right.
It's a little bit older. It's in the South. You know, it's a tale of star-crossed lovers.
Okay. A little sweet tea involved.
Oh, honey, it's the South. We invented tea and shade, and there's going to be a little bit of both of them
All right.
in this podcast.
All right.
Before we get started, let me thank some sources: Capital Punishment UK, Murderpedia, The Cinemaholic, LauraJames.com, Animalian.com, the Cowboy Henry Facebook page, KPLC TV in Louisiana, the Shreveport Journal, the Crowley Post Signal, the Weekly Town Talk, and the Shreveport Times.
That's a lot of research.
Lots of stuff going way back. You know I love looking at all the old newspapers.
Oh, yeah. Well, you ready to do this?
I am.
All right. Well, then let's do it.
Born on January 3rd, 1916, near Shreveport, Louisiana, Toni Jo Henry, who was born Annie Beatrice McQuinston, was the baby of 6 children.
Okay.
She was a spirited child.
We had a spirited child.
We did. And my late mother said, you just want to harness that spirit. And I said, no, I want to break it. I want to break that spirit. She's on Broadway working today while we're recording the podcast.
Yep.
So I guess we did okay.
We did okay.
But her mother died of tuberculosis when she was 6 years old. And after this, she kind of went from spirited to a little bit out of control. And her father remarried, and she didn't like her new stepmother, and she begged her aunt to take her away from her family home. Her sisters had gone on to become nurses, her brothers had taken jobs as laborers, and Anna Beatrice grew up and just kept becoming more and more beautiful by the day.
All right.
And a little bit more and more out of control.
It's a dangerous combination.
It is.
Yeah.
By 1929, and at the age of 13, she worked in a macaroni factory.
Okay.
Can't make that up.
Wow.
But she was fired after the manager found out that her mother had died of TB. So, tuberculosis is pretty much, it's been eradicated.
Right.
But Kentucky is one of the places in the hills of Appalachia or Appalachia, depending on where you live in the state, tuberculosis is alive and well.
Oh, really?
And it's very contagious.
I didn't know. Well, I knew it was contagious, but I didn't know it was alive and well.
It is. There
Wow.
are still cases of tuberculosis that come out of the hills of Kentucky.
Wow.
There have been medical papers written about this phenomenon.
Gotcha.
But because it's so contagious, her boss was like, you never told us that your mom died of TB. And they fired her.
Wow.
And when she came home, her dad beat her for losing her job.
What?
And she decided that was it.
Yeah.
She was leaving home for good.
She was done.
And by the time she was 17, she was known all over her hometown of Lake Charles, Louisiana as, quote, a lewd woman, end quote.
Okay.
She fell into drugs and was arrested several times for assault, larceny, and vagrancy. She snipped a man's ears with a pair of scissors
What?
and went to jail for a little bit.
Oh, man. Wow. And what year was this?
1933, 34.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
They called her, quote, the most ornery gal east of the Mississippi, end quote.
Wow.
And, quote, the bad girl of the bayou.
Man.
And, quote, the tiger girl.
Wow.
And here's a quote from her. Quote, lots of men have loved me, but I hate them, end quote.
Okay. Well, that pretty much says it all right there.
And here's why they love her so. She's a looker. Like, she's really pretty.
Okay.
All of the descriptions of Toni Jo that are ever printed talk about her eyes. She was, quote, slim. She was hard-faced, flint-eyed, smoldering-eyed.
Wow.
And she had long, beautiful, wavy, blue-black hair.
Okay.
Now, she's later going to be described as having brown hair, so I don't know if she's dyeing her hair or what she's doing, but
They didn't have L'Oreal back then, did
they did not. They did not. But I do think that they dyed their hair. But she's gorgeous. She's a natural beauty.
Okay.
She was a petite girl and a woman, and the men were bedeviled by her southern charm
Wow.
and her beauty.
Nice.
Now, she changed her name to Toni Jo and started working in a Shreveport brothel as a sex worker.
Wow.
She did this to feed her cocaine addiction. She's also a drinker. And from time to time, Toni Jo liked to smoke a little weed.
Tony's a little wild girl.
She's spirited.
She's spirited.
10 years later, in the fall of 1939, Toni Jo is 23, still working in the brothel. This is where she meets cowboy Claude Henry.
You can't make these names up.
He's 26 years old, a down-on-his-luck boxer with a history of petty crimes and violence, and these two fall for each other hard.
Wow.
And Cowboy was stuck on Toni Jo like kudzu on a junked-out car. Cowboy was born on July 14th, 1913 in Pleasantville, Texas. His parents were Jesse James Jr. and Anzo Keith Henry.
Okay.
He had 4 brothers and 1 sister. Cowboy is the baby of the family. His real name is Claude, but everybody calls him Cowboy.
Okay.
When he's 6 years old, his father is committed by the court to the Southwest Texas Insane Asylum.
Hmm.
He grows up riding horses in the country. And he used to put on like little rodeos when he was a kid for his family.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Like he would gather the family together.
Sure.
You know, our kids, gathered everybody together for a show or whatever.
Yeah.
He's gathering everybody together because he's putting on a rodeo.
There you go.
But Cowboy was getting into trouble by the time he was 13.
Mm.
Can you see where these two would get along like a house of fire?
Yeah.
Okay. But his family ends up moving to San Antonio, where he goes on to go to high school. And when he would get into fights in high school, he wouldn't just hit the other guy. He would pummel the other guy. He becomes an accomplished boxer.
Oh, wow.
And he graduates and promptly steals a car the next night. And by the age of 20, he'd been booked in the county jail over 30 times.
Good grief. Gee whiz.
Times are tough in the late 30s, Rob.
Yes. Gee, many Christmas.
On November 16th, 1937, Cowboy at the time is 24 years old, and he's charged with murder after fatally shooting Arthur Sinclair, a special officer and former San Antonio policeman.
Okay.
He does it after midnight in the rear of the Monte Carlo Inn.
Wow.
But Cowboy and many others who witnessed it said it was in self-defense.
Okay.
Sinclair had fired 2 shots at Cowboy first, and then Cowboy, ever the cowboy, takes his gun from him and shoots him.
Wow.
And apparently, this whole fight was over Arthur Sinclair making a couple of lewd comments to young women in the bar that night.
Mm-hmm.
He's a gentleman. He might have been in jail 30 times, and he might have just shot himself a cop. But you're not going to disrespect the ladies.
Right.
Now, after he meets Toni Jo, he helps her kick her drug habit, and he takes her to a hotel, and he helps her go cold turkey.
Okay.
On November 25th, 1939, a justice of the peace married the love-struck couple. Toni Jo was actually married under her real name, Annie Beatrice McQuinston.
Okay.
That had to keep it legal.
Sure.
And then they honeymooned in Southern California. Cowboy called her, quote, a swell kid, end quote.
I love that word, swell.
Swell. She's the ham to his cheese, the jelly to his peanut butter.
His peas to his carrots.
Quote, she'd hang 4 times for Cowboy, end quote.
Wow.
Now that is love.
I guess. Somewhere deep in there, it's love. Yeah.
But the blissful honeymoon is cut a little bit short when Cowboy receives a telegram to appear in court in Texas on his shooting and murder charge.
Gotcha.
That's right. He's in trouble before they even tie the knot from that murder. Cowboy Claude Henry was to be tried for the murder of this ex-San Antonio police officer from the bar fight.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it just got out of control. Everything that I read was it was a bar fight, got out of control.
Right.
Cowboy turns up at the court despite Toni Jo pleading with him. Let's just go on the run. Don't go. I'll go on the run with you.
Wow.
But he's going to face the music.
Sure.
He's like, no, honey, I'm going. And Toni Jo stayed optimistic about it all because she believed her husband's story of self-defense.
Right.
And she's thinking, he's going to be acquitted. He will certainly be acquitted.
Right.
He is not.
Oh, wow.
Claude Cowboy Henry is found guilty. And when Toni Jo, who's sitting in the courtroom, hears a sentence of 50 years in prison,
Whoa.
she shouts, quote, I'll get you out, cowboy. Don't worry, end quote.
That's probably something you shouldn't yell in a courtroom.
Yeah, I'll spring you, honey. Don't worry. There'll be a file in the cake.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
But Toni Jo, she meant business. She decided she would break him out of prison if she had to do it with her own 2 hands.
Wow.
Because she would do anything for him.
Sure.
As long as she had a biscuit, Cowboy was getting half. Now, because Toni Jo had been in the business of sex work and drugs for a long time, she's really well acquainted with the criminals and the underbelly of Louisiana and southern Texas.
I'm sure she is.
Some of them were her clients. She immediately started making plans to spring Cowboy, despite being warned by all these underworld people. This is a bad idea.
No good can come of this.
This is a bad idea, honey.
Yeah.
She moved to Beaumont, Texas to be near the Huntsville prison, and every day she plotted how to break Cowboy out of the pokey. But she needed money. And just like that, a man named Harold Finnan Burks, also known as Arkansas, and was always called Arky by Toni Jo, walked into her life. As you might imagine, Arky is from Arkansas.
I was going to say that, okay.
But it's spelled Arkansas. Now, Arky had just been released from the Huntsville prison and was presently AWOL from the United States Army.
Oh.
So, not a Boy Scout by any means.
Yeah.
But he did possess knowledge of the prison because that's where he had been.
Right.
And together, these two decide that they can break Cowboy out. They plan to steal a car and then rob a bank that Arky knew about in a small town in Arkansas. They're going to use that money to pay the expenses they'd have in springing him from the joint.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? They had pistols, which Toni Jo got from a couple of her underground acquaintances. She'd had them steal them. She had these guys steal her guns and ammo from a shop.
Oh.
And then Arky and Toni Jo, these two pose as newlyweds, and hitch rides toward Arkansas. They're heading to their target bank. They don't even have a car. They got nothing. They got bullets and they got pistols. That's it.
They're just winging this thing.
They really are. Yeah, winging it. By the evening of the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, 1940, they're in Orange, Texas, and they were looking for, quote, the right car. And then it came along. They manifested the right car, and it showed up. A man named Joseph Prince Calloway was driving past. Joe Calloway was born on February 18th, 1898 in Franklin County, North Carolina. He was a good old Southern gentleman. His parents were Prince and Charlotte Chambers Calloway, and Joe had 9, count 'em, 9 siblings.
Wow.
Joe was married and he had a daughter. Her name was Lita. She's 17 years old. She worked as a movie cashier.
Okay.
Now, the 41-year-old salesman from Humble, Texas, was driving a brand spanking new Ford Coupe V8.
Just ready for the taking.
Brand new. Plastic's not even off of it.
Yeah.
He's on his way to deliver this brand new car to a friend. He stops and he offers these two a ride. Toni Jo had her little thumb out. She's hitching a ride. It's raining. He probably felt sorry for her.
Yep.
Or maybe he thought this is a beautiful woman, combination of the two. Again,
Right.
He's a Southern gentleman. She's out in the rain with Arky. He picks them both up.
I love that name, Arky.
Yeah. And then I wrote, no good deed goes unpunished.
Exactly.
Now, we've talked about the Ford V8 before. It was a favorite car used by gangsters at the time, and Arky and Toni Jo know this. It was powerful, and it could outrun any police car in the country, and they'd need to do that after they broke Cowboy out of prison.
Sure.
Got to have a fast getaway car.
Yep.
As the three of them drive through Jennings, Louisiana, where Joe's supposed to deliver the car, they pass through Lake Charles, where the road takes them into the countryside. It's quiet, and they're all alone on the road.
Okay.
Toni Jo pulls out her .32 caliber pistol and tells Joe to pull off the main highway and onto a very small country road. Yeah, she has just carjacked Joe.
Wow.
When she gets him to stop, she makes him get out of the car, forcing him at gunpoint, tells him to take off all his clothes, strip.
Wow.
And I just, in my head, I'm thinking she's saying, I've seen it all before, honey. Take it off.
Yeah.
Worked in the brothel, seen it all.
Yep.
Take it off.
Wow.
After she makes him strip, she gathers his clothes, takes his wallet and $15 and his watch. So why did she take his clothes? Well, she liked his suit and she thought it would look nice on Cowboy, and he's going to need something to wear when they break him out of the pokey.
Hey, she was just thinking ahead.
She's thinking ahead. She forces him to get into the trunk of the car, butt-ass naked,
Wow.
and sets off with Archie driving for just a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And when she finds a suitable place, she makes Joe get out of the trunk, walks him behind some haystacks. She forces him to kneel and tells him to say his prayers.
Whoa.
Joseph Calloway is shivering in the cold and begging for his life.
Wow.
Toni Jo shot him between the eyes with the .32 caliber pistol.
Wow.
Takes a turn for the dark. It is
Yeah.
a true crime podcast.
Didn't see that coming.
Didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
She and Archie made off in the Ford. They're driving through the night to Camden, Arkansas, where they had originally intended to rob this bank. And they booked into this cheap hotel. And while Toni Jo is sleeping, Archie, who was really upset over this cold-blooded murder of Joe Calloway by Toni Jo, he yeets on out in the middle of the night. He takes the car and he takes Joe's clothes with him.
Wow.
Yeah, murder was not on his dance card.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. He's going to say later that he was broke when he met Toni Jo, and he just went along with her crazy ass plan so he could get a ride back to Arkansas because he wanted to get back into the arms of a pretty Arkansas girl.
No.
The lengths that men will go to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she wakes up in the hotel with nothing. All she has left is the money that she got off of Joe. So she buys herself a bus ticket and heads home to Shreveport. She contacts an old friend who ran a brothel in Shreveport, and her friend persuades her. She says, Toni Jo, go stay with your aunt. And her aunt clearly sees that Toni Jo is in trouble, but can only get little bits of information out of her. And her aunt is so worried, she decides to tell her brother, who's a policeman, but he is actually on vacation.
Okay.
So she explained her concerns to one of her brother's friends, Sergeant Dave Walker. Now, Sergeant Walker comes to the aunt's house and he interviews Toni Jo. Officer Walker is well aware that Joe Calloway is a missing person.
Okay.
But he had no idea what he was about to hear from Toni Jo. And with great emotion, she tells the police officer her tale. She'd planned a jailbreak for Cowboy. She'd teamed up with Archie Burks and had stolen a bunch of guns from a gun shop, and they were preparing to rob a bank. And then Toni Jo's plan was to use the money to bribe officials into shortening Cowboy's 50-year sentence.
Okay.
She hands over the revolver with the one fired bullet and 5 live rounds still in it. She says, this is the gun I used to kill him.
Wow.
And Officer Walker didn't know if he believed her confession because a murder hadn't been reported, just a missing man.
Yeah.
And nobody and the car had been found.
Right, right.
There's no body, no crime.
Why is she just giving up all the goods?
She gave it up. She just gave it up.
Okay.
I think she gave up and then she gave it up. She's not really a murderer.
Yeah.
Yeah, she just wanted to be with Cowboy.
Right. She would do whatever she had to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he decides to arrest her and hand her over to the Lake Charles police, who took her out in a car to try to locate the body of Joe Calloway. And she does it. She takes them to the correct spot. They find Joe Calloway's body just as Toni Jo had left it. The bullet that killed him was recovered at the autopsy and was found to match the gun that she had given to Sergeant Walker.
So all the pieces just came
All the
together.
pieces fit.
Okay.
But here's the thing. If she hadn't said all of that and hadn't turned it all over, there was no way anybody could connect her to
Yeah.
Joe Calloway.
Yeah.
She really, I'm telling you, she gave up. She gave it all over.
Yeah, especially back in 1940.
Yeah, really hard to connect her to that.
Yeah.
The Ford coupe was soon discovered abandoned in Arkansas and still containing Mr. Calloway's clothing, and there were also some cigarette butts with lipstick on them. No DNA, of course,
Right.
but they were Toni Jo's.
Right.
Toni Jo was formally charged with murder, but refused to give any details of her accomplice because she was displeased at the way she was being reported in the press.
Okay. I think that's the least of her problems.
But to her, it's important.
Yeah.
And when she wouldn't talk to the police, they brought Cowboy from prison to, quote, wring a confession out of her. Ring as in W-R-I-N-G.
Yeah.
Gonna wring it out of her.
Yep.
Quote, please, honey, tell them the truth, end quote.
Yeah.
Apparently, he said this over and over and over, so she did, admitting they knocked the guy off. Quote, I let him say his prayers, and then I gave it to him right between the eyes,
Gee
end
whiz.
quote.
Hmm.
Archie, off in the arms of an Arkansas girl, was soon arrested and brought back to Louisiana and charged with the murder as well. They were to be tried separately. Toni Jo is taken into custody, and by the time her trial rolls around, just 1 month later, on March 27th, 1940, so she commits the crime. She kills him on the 14th,
Right.
Valentine's Day.
Right.
March 27th is her trial.
Okay.
Can you imagine today
Uh,
that it happening that fast? It's
Yeah.
just crazy.
no.
But that is her trial. Toni Jo has a different story when she gets up on the witness stand. This time, I didn't do it. It was all Archie Burke's. It was his idea. He was the trigger man.
Yeah.
After all, he was a convicted felon.
Sure.
And her only crime had been to love her man, Cowboy. Something important to note, Toni Jo's trial in Lake Charles is at the Calcasieu Parish Courthouse,
Okay.
where her fine reputation had preceded her. The judge let this absolutely huge crowd into the courtroom, and it was so packed with folks, sometimes the defense attorneys couldn't even see all the jurors' faces.
Really?
The flash bulbs drown out the arguments of the attorneys.
Wow.
And all in attendance let their wishes be known, because during the trial, audience members made the hanging sign by drawing their fingers across their neck while looking at the jurors.
Wow.
And when the jurors went to lunch, they would hear men and women shouting, quote, hang her, hang the bitch, end quote.
Oh, man. Oh, pretty hard to get a fair trial when that's going on. Yeah.
But the press loved her.
Of course they
Even though she's a murderer.
Yep.
She was called a, quote, sultry woman.
Mm-hmm.
The jury holed up for 7 hours before reaching a verdict. Guilty.
Yep.
Toni Jo Henry is sentenced to the electric chair.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
And not long after, Archie Burke's trial begins, and he too is found guilty, and he too is sentenced to the electric chair.
Whoa.
Not messing around in Louisiana.
Daggone.
Toni Jo's attorneys appealed the verdict not once, but twice. On the first appeal in the state of Louisiana versus Henry, the Supreme Court of Louisiana said, quote, the populace clamored for the death penalty. They demanded the life of the accused and clearly manifested their desires to the jury by signs and gestures which could not be misunderstood.
Yeah, exactly.
The trial was attended by throngs, hundreds more than could be seated, crowded into the courthouse. The courtroom was literally packed and jammed with spectators. The judge says that more than 150 either stood or were seated within the railing which separated his stand from the space reserved for spectators.
Jeez.
The record clearly shows that they were present not merely through interest, but for the purpose of letting it be known that they demanded the death penalty.
Yeah. They had standing room only.
Yes. Public sentiment against the accused was at fever heat. No punishment inflicted on the accused except that of death would appease the wrath of the throng. End quote.
Wow.
Now, she did get a new trial on the grounds that the trial judge had permitted conduct prejudicial to her case and was granted a retrial, which took place in February 1941. Archie testifies against her, and this time the jury only took an hour to convict her. Again, she heard the death penalty pronounced again.
Wow.
And she appealed again for a third time and wins.
Right.
And her third trial took place in January 1942 with the by now usual outcome.
Yeah.
You are guilty.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court is like, too bad.
Yep.
This is your sentence. While Toni Jo had been going through the courts, Louisiana had changed its execution method from hanging to electrocution.
Mm-hmm.
The court found that this was in line with the Constitution, and the state governor let it be known that there would be no reprieve for Toni Jo.
She's done.
Yep.
You put a fork in her.
Finally, a date is set in 1942 for Toni Jo to sit in the chair. But while she's waiting in the Lake Charles prison, she's baptized by Father Wayne Richard, a Catholic priest, who attended to her.
Okay.
And as you might imagine, Cowboy Henry is devastated that his love is going to die in the chair. He sits in prison so upset, but decided he couldn't sit idly by and let Toni Jo die. He's her knight in shining armor, and he's going to come to her rescue no matter what.
Okay.
Just before Thanksgiving, on November 23rd, 1942, you had to know it wasn't over.
Yeah. I was going, well, this is a short one.
Just before Thanksgiving, on November 23rd, 1942, 5 days before Toni Jo was scheduled to become the first and only woman to die in Louisiana's electric chair, Cowboy busted himself out of the Texas prison farm in Huntsville, where he had been transferred.
Okay.
His plan? He was going to kidnap the judge who had given Toni Jo the death sentence and hold him hostage until they agreed to free Toni Jo.
Yeah, okay, that's going to work.
These two are working from the same playbook.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. 2 days later, police find Cowboy holed up in a Beaumont, Texas hotel.
Okay.
Toni Jo is interviewed just before the execution date, and she decided she might as well, quote, kick the lid off, end quote.
Okay. What does that mean?
She's going to tell it all.
Oh.
She's going to kick the lid off.
Okay.
She talked about Cowboy. Quote, I was a bad girl at 13, a drug addict at 16. Nobody ever cared about me before him. That guy is the king of my heart. He gave me a home, and he got that drug monkey off my back. I remember the day I told him I was a cokey, and the look on his face. He thought I just smoked a little marijuana and grinned. But when I told him my train went a lot further than marijuana, he took me to a hotel room, and I lay there in bed for a week, and he would come in now and then and ask how I was doing. And he would slap my face with iced towels, and we'd both laugh, end quote.
Okay.
When asked about her current situation, she said, quote, I think condemned persons fret more about losing contact with human beings than anything else. You feel so out of it. It's more than these bars. It's more like a hellish battle with long distance when she won't give you a number.
And then I made one phone call to information.
Anybody's number, not one friendly human being's number.
Wah.
You get so cold, and pretty soon you're a freak even to yourself, end
I'm so cold.
quote.
Wow.
Toni Jo was cheerful and smiled and chatted with reporters and photographers while they take her photo. Quote, I've smiled twice, mister, she told one. Quote, have you any idea how much talent is being wasted here today,
Oh,
end
geez.
quote.
Wow. Too bad she had low self-esteem.
Yeah. Toni Jo admitted that she lied about Archie Burks being the trigger man. She came clean about that one.
Okay.
When a reporter asked about the man she murdered, Joe Calloway, who left behind a wife and a daughter, quote, "I've asked myself 1,000 times, and I don't know why I killed that man. I'm willing to walk down to the chair and I'll take my medicine," end quote.
Okay.
Yeah, she's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Toni Jo said her dying wish was just to talk to Cowboy one more time. It was a violation of the rules, but they allowed it, and Cowboy and Toni Jo are given one last phone call on November 27th, 1942. Quote, "I'm glad to have known you for the short time that I did. I'm sorry that things had to turn out this way. But you've got to live right, Claude. Hurry up and get that zoot suit off and walk out the front door like a man so your mother will be proud of you." End quote.
Wow.
She told him, quote, "Go straight and try to make something of your life," end quote.
Wow.
I thought it was interesting. Get that zoot suit off, meaning stop being a criminal.
Yep.
Yeah.
No
Get
more
this-
gangsta.
Get that zoot suit off.
Yep.
Now, she's saying all this on the phone, and Cowboy is on the other end sobbing, like really sobbing.
Right.
She did all of the talking. He did all the crying.
Wow.
The next day, Saturday, November 28th, it's Toni Jo's execution day, 12:05 p.m. That's the time she's to be executed in the basement of the Lake Charles prison in Louisiana's portable electric chair, which had been brought from Angola the day before.
Oh, wow.
She wore a plain black dress and black pumps, and she was said to have cried when her head was shaved. Toni Jo promised to go quietly, but she was really upset about her hair, and they promised to hunt up a scarf for her to put over her bald head because she knew that the photographers were lined up outside to see her taken to the death room.
Wow.
And they did.
Right.
They found her a brightly colored scarf. Kenny Reed, the deputy sheriff in charge of her, read her the death warrant and asked her if she had any final statement. She replied, quote, "I think not," end quote.
That was it?
That's it.
Wow.
She was then led to the execution chamber, holding Father Richard's hand. Several press reporters were present, and she managed to smile for them. The only thing she asked for before her death, this is going to kill Rob, the only thing she wanted was that her death row companion, a little black and white puppy,
Oh.
to be given to her niece.
Oh.
And she also wanted to be buried with her crucifix in her left hand.
Okay.
She was strapped into the chair. The electrodes were applied to her bald head and her calf, and a leather mask put over her face.
Okay.
She was allowed to pray for a few moments, and then the executioner said, "Goodbye, Toni Jo," end quote.
Wow.
And she mumbled a reply. A moment later, 2,000 volts hit her, and at 12:12 p.m., she was certified dead by the prison doctor.
Okay.
Her body was removed a few minutes later, and her last request that her crucifix be in her left hand when she was buried was taken care of by Father Richard, who actually officiated at her burial in a cemetery in Lake Charles and designed the headstone for her grave.
Okay.
Archie was executed in the exact same electric chair 4 months later.
So even though she admitted that he was not the trigger man,
Even though Toni Jo said, "Yeah, it's my responsibility for this murder."
wow.
She said this even after her last appeal, and she knew she was dying. Yeah, and he went to the electric chair too.
Gee whiz.
No relatives came forward to claim his body, so it was buried in an unmarked grave. Her only motive for the murder was to get to Cowboy and to be with him again. Of course, it's not very well thought out. She did it for love, no matter the cost.
Sure.
And when she confessed, she gave it all up. There was no murder weapon, no body. She gave them all the evidence they would need to convict her.
Yeah.
All the evidence they would need to convict her to the electric chair.
Yeah. And they wouldn't have known any of it unless she would have.
They would not have
Yeah.
known any of it unless she gave it all up. 2 years after Toni Jo's execution, a broken-hearted Claude Cowboy Henry is paroled. He didn't have to serve 50 years.
Wow.
He was later gunned down on a Dallas street 3 months later after a brawl with a barkeep. So they were together again.
Yep.
Interestingly enough, the courthouse where Toni Jo was convicted has quite a bit of paranormal activity.
Oh, really?
And most of it is attributed to Toni
Toni Jo.
Jo's ghost.
Oh, man.
Most of the activity centers around malfunctioning office equipment, which often turns itself on and off. There are also reports of disembodied footsteps and the ghostly voice of a woman as well, and the smell of Toni Jo's perfume
Really?
wafts through the air.
Wow.
Perhaps the strangest phenomena is the smell of burning hair, which has been reported in several areas of the
Is
courthouse.
that right? Wow.
Quote, well, if something goes missing at the office or something gets misplaced, it's an automatic blame on Toni Jo, end quote, said Trent Gramillion, who works in the mortgage department.
Wow.
Quote, sometimes our front door as you come into the mortgage department will just lock, and it's always Toni Jo.
Well, at least I got a scapegoat now.
It's always Toni Jo.
Yeah.
Toni Jo is the only woman to this day in Louisiana who died by the electric chair.
Wow.
And she did it all for love.
Wow.
But that is the story of Toni Jo and Cowboy Henry. Lovers, lovers, lovers. That's all I have to say about that.
Wow, that's like a movie script. Jeez.
You know, we do so many really heavy cases. I just wanted to toss one in there that had a little down home feel to it. I mean, how can you mess it up when Toni Jo and Cowboy are in love?
And an electric chair.
And there's a murder and an electric chair.
Yeah, exactly.
And tons of press. Some of the pictures from this are crazy. So yeah.
Okay, well, let's get away from that and do a little, well, bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right. Once again, we always have 4.
Are we going to bless Arky's heart first?
Poor Ark. See, that's a bummer. I'm like, the dude didn't even pull the trigger. And when she did it, he was like, I'm out of here. I didn't sign up for this.
He just wanted to ride to Arkansas. He's just going along. He didn't steal any of the guns.
Yeah.
She had other people do that.
Yeah.
He's just along for the ride.
Wow.
Trying to get into the arms and probably the pants of a
Jeez.
woman in Arkansas.
Yeah. Oh, well. Okay. And yet I digress. Okay. Number 1. Oh, wait. I need that back.
Okay.
Committing a crime is a stressful endeavor, and mistakes do happen. If there's one thing all robbers should remember, however, it's that your gun is your most valuable asset.
Okay.
This particular robber seemed to forget the fact as he attempted to rob the Halifax Bank in London.
Oh, that's like a big bank.
Yeah.
Okay.
Demanding the teller fill the bag with money, he accidentally gave away his gun to the teller instead of the bag.
Oh.
Yeah. After a brief moment of confusion, the bank worker retreated, forcing the robber to flee. At least he managed to escape with a bank employee's bicycle. And they still don't know his name.
You know what that reminds me of? That's like me talking on my cell phone, walking around going, I can't find my phone. Bless her heart.
I know. All right, number 2, an uncanny resemblance. A fake ID is a teenage rite of passage.
True.
But when you show a fake ID, you should make sure you're not handing it to the actual owner.
Oh.
You know, the one whose face is on the ID you're holding in your hand, right?
Oops.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened to one 26-year-old woman at Applebee's in 2013 when she showed the waitress, Brianna Pretty, her own driver's license as proof of age. It had been stolen with a bunch of her other possessions a month earlier. Instead of bringing her a margarita, Brianna brought her the cops, and the thief was caught red-handed.
Oh, can you imagine? I need to see some ID. What the?
That looks just like. All right, number 3. Well, I didn't see that coming. In any criminal endeavor, there's plenty that can go wrong. But step 1 is actually getting inside the building you hope to rob.
Okay.
First, you put on the black ski mask.
A 28-year-old Christopher Koch should have looked at the opening hours before attempting to rob a Citizens and Northern Bank in Liberty, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Wearing a ski mask and gloves, he rushed and slammed right into a locked door. It was then he realized that the bank had just closed. Now, with the ski mask and a bit dazed, he looked around, peeked into the bank's glass door, and once he realized that he was being watched by bank employees who were in disbelief, he decided to give up on his failed attempt. Now, to be completely fair, what kind of bank closes at noon, right? Now, as Koch sheepishly retreated, employees inside wrote down his license plate number, and he was later arrested.
Can't you just see, like, bam, and everyone's like, what?
What the? And then he's standing there with his ski mask peering into the window trying to see what's going on inside. Oh, man.
Oh, that's such a good visual.
Yeah. That's when you should probably, like, reevaluate your life. And
I'm
decisions.
crying. Okay, sorry.
All right,
okay.
Number four, go big or go home. If you're already committing a crime, why not go big? In 2011, a 53-year-old North Carolina man tried to use a $1 million bill to buy a microwave, a vacuum cleaner, and other merchandise at Walmart.
What? They didn't take it?
Well, the total price of the goods was $476. So he apparently fairly optimistic about how much change Walmart keeps in their registers. Unfortunately, the cashier didn't have $999,524 on him. And
She didn't have $900 in there, probably.
Yeah. And there's no such thing as a $1 million bill leading to Fuller's arrest.
Oh.
So as it turns out, sometimes when it comes to going big or going home, you should just probably go home. Yeah. Yeah. So there you go. There's your bless your hearts.
Those were all very good. I had a tear. I shed a tear. If I'm shedding a tear, they're good. Oh, bless their hearts.
Yeah, I know.
No, I still keep seeing the guy in the ski mask running at the door.
Boom. Jeez. What an idiot.
I'm sorry. Well, if you have a bless your heart, or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, or the guy, you're the person who pushes the pull door.
Yeah. If you're
trying
running
to get
doors.
anywhere, you can go to hitchedtohomicide.com. There's a pull down menu.
Yep.
Send it to us. We'd love to talk about it, and also put them on the official Hitched to Homicide prayer list to bless their heart.
There you go. Jeez.
You can also suggest a case while you're there.
Good.
Well, that's all the mayhem we have today. That's my amazing husband out there.
That's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.